You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Cynthia Toolin-Wilson on my interview radio show, Author to Author, with Father Lawrence Tucker, who is a member of the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity. And today we're going to be talking about his book, Masters of Interior Space. How are you today, Father?
Well, I'm doing great. Thanks be to God, Cynthia. Everything is going well, and I'm so happy to be here with you to speak to and to your listeners about my new book, Masters of Interior Space, a novel about the spiritual life, which was just released recently on Amazon and at the En route Books and Media publishers website. So yeah, it's quite an exciting book. It's when was the last time you read a novel that was actually the point of the novel was to introduce people to the spiritual life, in a very simple but clear way. So
never actually. That's
exactly.
great.
Exactly. That really was one of the main reasons for, writing it. I had always been thinking about, many years ago, I think it was in 2010, I wrote a little treatise on interior prayer, on contemplative prayer called The Prayer of Jesus Crucified. And ever since then, I have written 3 other books, but I was always contemplating the idea of writing sort of like a follow-up to that contemplative prayer book, maybe something which would go into a little greater depth or whatever. And then as I thought about it more, I said, you know what? What's the point of another treatise on quiet prayer? There's so many out there, and of course there's the long-standing ones, the classics, the Carmelite Masses, the teachers of contemplative prayer ever, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila. So I was thinking, what's the point of writing another treatise? People aren't even reading the treatises that already exist. And then the thought occurred to me, well, wait a minute. People read novels. They enjoy a good story. Why don't I just write a novel, a story, which within the story, you're going to get a lot about quiet prayer and the importance of the interior life, And so that was really the motivation behind it, Cynthia, was that this would be a better vehicle for our times, recognizing that people really don't read spiritual treatises that often anymore. If they read anything, how many people even just read anymore? So I figured, well, people are reading stories. Novels are still selling and stuff. So that's what I did. Something that I have never seen, like you just said, I've never seen it done before, where the medium of a novel was used to communicate and teach about the interior life and about contemplative prayer.
Yeah, that's a great idea. It's a great combination.
Yeah,
I could see something like that becoming a classic.
Oh, thank you. I really hope it does. And that's where the title comes from. The book starts out, the book, Cynthia, as I said, it's a story. It's a novel. So there's characters. And so there's 4 main characters, and 3 of them are students. The 3 young people are 21 years old, and all 3 of them have just graduated from college with bachelor's degrees. One graduated from Notre Dame. That's the main character, Stuart Mackenzie. He graduated from Notre Dame in history. And then there's Charlotte Mahfoud, who is from Algeria, and she graduated with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. And then there's Tobias Trisong. He's actually Tibetan, but his family escaped Tibet when the Chinese invaded Tibet, and the Dalai Lama escaped to India, and so did many of his extended family. And Tobias Trisong was one of the members of the extended family. So he wasn't born yet, but escaped to India. And then they went to the Seychelles, the little islands off Kenya and off of Somalia in the Indian Ocean they used to be a British colony. Now they're independent. And so Tobias's parents moved there because they were high school teachers, and that's where he was born. So he graduated. He was studying peace and conflict resolution studies in the Seychelles. So these three 21-year-old college graduates, the Holy Spirit brings them together and also adds to their team a university professor from Notre Dame. His name is Dr. James Lawton, and his specialty is history. And so the Lord, through the power and the grace of the Spirit, brings together this team of four individuals, and it's really a dynamic story, Cynthia. I smile whenever I think of it because it's really a very cool story, the way you see how the story moves, how the Spirit operates, and how these individuals respond to the Spirit as the Spirit leads them.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're led to meet up in Algiers, and then in Algiers, that's where Charlotte, whose nickname is Charlie, she's one of the protagonists. She's one of the young people. She's from Algeria. She's not from Algiers, but she's from Algeria. So she kind of hold of the mission from there and leads these four individuals, the professor and the three students, out into the middle of the Sahara Desert to a secret, you could call it a secret formation site, where a retired bishop from Paris, he's 80 years old, and his name is Jean-Pierre. He doesn't want to be called bishop. He's retired. He said, no, out here in the desert, I'm Jean-Pierre. And so he has a little corner of a little oasis out in the middle of the Sahara, not too far away from where Charles de Foucault was. You know, Charles de Foucault lived in Tamanrasset, and so the place where the students, let's call them the missionaries, the place where they go for their secret formation is out in the desert there with Jean-Pierre. So they arrive there riding on camels. Charlotte is an expert in rearing and training camels. And so they to the little oasis, the little secret formation site where the Spirit brings people who are being formed for special missions. And they're formed there. They're an intense 7 days of intense formation in prayer with this 80-year-old, just a total, the term I use is a master of interior space. That was a term that was given to Stuart. See, there was a part of the book that I didn't say, but when Stuart and Professor Lawton left Notre Dame they left to go to Spain to do research in Granada on Queen Isabella. See, this is before they went to Algeria. And so while they were on this tramp steamer that was taking them all around, took them, from New York to Spain and then to Algeria. While they were on that tramp steamer, they came across in a secret cargo hold, how would you say, like a room, like a vault.
Sure, compartment. Yeah.
Yeah, like a place in the very bottom of the ship where no one would find it, a very secret holding area where special cargo would go. Well, they went in there. They were led by the Spirit to go in there, and they came across. Well, Stuart was the only one who made it into that hold. Dr. Lawton was locked out, but Stuart got in. And while he was in there was a sort of an apparition that took place with a statue of Queen Isabella, a very legendary statue that hardly anyone even believed it existed. Dr. Lawton believed it existed, but hardly anyone in Spain, the government, the church didn't believe it existed, but it did exist. And while Stuart was in there, this statue, which was legendary for like coming to life, it actually, I told you, this is a novel, okay? Yeah. This is all that I from the magic, you know? And people are listening are like, oh, I want to go visit that statue, you know? I mean, it's, no, this statue doesn't, as far as I know, but in my story it exists. So anyway, it comes to life and it speaks to Stuart. She, you know, she's blessed, right? I mean, well, she's not blessed, but she's a servant of God, Queen Isabella of Castile. And so queen, you know, she was the great queen who sponsored Columbus's voyage, you know, to the New World.
Right. Yeah.
She's like just a total legend in Spain and in all of Europe, actually in all of the world, but especially in Spain. And so the statue comes to life in this unlit vault that Stuart is locked in. He doesn't even know what's in there. He can't even see, but he sees the statue glowing. So he walks over to it and the queen talks to him and the queen gives him the mission from God. So that's where that's how the mission originated. It originated in the depths of the hold of an ancient tramp steamer, you know, as it was crossing the Mediterranean from Malaga, Spain to Algiers. And that's how these four masters of interior space not only got their mission, but that's where they got their name from. That's the name that Queen Isabella called them. She told Stuart, you know, this is the name I want you guys to operate under. You're going to be masters of interior space because I want the world to recognize that human beings are inherently gifted, not as masters of the universe, but of masters of the interior universe of man. The interiority of the person is our gift area. And so the whole point of the mission was that reality that human beings are not, their main sort of universe of operation is not so much the world around them, but the world within them, where they meet up with God. And you see what I'm saying? So that was the mission, was to bring that message in a renewed way to the world and to teach these masters a way of prayer that would sustain their already beautiful interior life, but they needed something more that would help them to, in a disciplined way, to maintain it. And that's what they learn in the desert with Jean-Pierre, the retired bishop from Paris. They learn like how to go even deeper into the quiet. And then, so is this a little bit hard to follow, or are you getting this?
No, it's not hard at all. It's beautiful.
Oh, good.
Like that.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, that's so. You know, as the author, I'm wondering if I'm going into too much detail, if no one can follow what I'm saying. But
no, that's fine.
Oh, okay, good. So they go into the desert. They meet up with Jean-Pierre. He starts forming them. And on the last day that they're there with Jean-Pierre, the Lord, the Holy Spirit, reveals to Jean-Pierre where they're to go on their mission. And so, believe it or not, their mission is going to be in downtown Manhattan, New York City. That's where the Lord is sending them, from the heart of the Sahara. I mean, talk about worlds apart, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Absolute, total, contemplative solitude in the heart of the desert. They're going from there to the direct opposite, the biggest, busiest, noisiest metropolis on the planet.
Yeah.
And not only that, Cynthia, they're being sent there by the Spirit, and they're how would you say it? They're directed by the Spirit, and this is what Jean-Pierre tells them, that God enlightened him to communicate to them their mission, that not only are they to go, but they're to bring their animals. They're to bring the 4 camels.
Oh.
And they had the 4 camels that took out to the desert. They're to take them with them to downtown Manhattan. And also the burro. The burro's name is Augustine. He's to go with them as well. And while they were in the desert, they adopted a fennec fox kit. I don't know if you're, Sebastian is very familiar with Northern Africa, and he knows all about the fennec fox. But the fennec fox is the national animal for Algeria, and it's now all of us have seen. Well, most of us have seen Chihuahuas, right?
Right.
So, Chihuahua is a little dog. He's a very feisty, very courageous little dog. He's really quite a phenomenon. Well, a full-grown Chihuahua is 5 pounds, approximately 5 pounds. A full-grown fox is only 3 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine how small an adult fennec fox is. Well, imagine a baby fennec fox, which is called a kit. A baby fox is called a kit. Well, while the masters of interior space were in the desert, a fennec fox showed up, a kit, a baby, that had probably escaped, being, killed by a jackal. Probably the fox's mother was a jackal. So they adopted the fennec fox. So he's now part of their team. So you have a university professor, 3 college students, 4 camels, a burro, and a fennec fox. This is the mission team that the Lord is sending to downtown Manhattan.
Oh, my.
Yeah,
I
you
love
can just imagine.
That's great.
Yeah. And so they get there, they take the Lord arranged for them to take the same the same tramp steamer back to New York City. And they get off, I don't know when was the last time you were in the city, in Manhattan, but
long time ago.
Well, probably about 15 or 20 years ago, they stopped having commercial ships land in Manhattan. They started to direct them to the Brooklyn piers, and only because tourism was on the rise and such. And so they had, and for reasons, and so the only ships that are allowed to dock at Manhattan itself are the tourist ships, the cruise liners and whatever, the Circle Line boat that around the island of Manhattan. So all the commercial traffic goes either to Newark, New Jersey, or to the Brooklyn piers. Okay. So they land at the Brooklyn piers, and the captain of the tramp steamer, which is called, by the way, Rocinante, which is the name of Don Quixote's horse, was Rocinante. And so that's the name of the ship. So it lands in Brooklyn. Now, the masters, the captain arranged for them to be secreted off the ship so that they wouldn't have to go through any kind of customs with the animals and all that stuff. So now they're in, but they have to get to Manhattan. So the Brooklyn piers are right near the Brooklyn Bridge. So the plan is they're going to cross the Brooklyn Bridge into Manhattan, because that's where the mission is. It's in Manhattan. Well, they find out as they're walking towards the Brooklyn Bridge, walking along the East River, they run into some teenage gang members from the Latin Kings. The Latin Kings is an enormous gang in the United States. Probably the biggest gang in the whole nation is the Latin Kings.
Wow.
We hear about the Bloods and the Crips and this kind of thing, but the Latin Kings is actually, if I'm not mistaken, the biggest gang in the country, and they practically run the whole prison system of the nation. Oh, bro. But they're I'm not saying that this is a good thing, but this is just reality. This is just what it is. So they run in 3 teenage members of the Latin Kings. Well, these teenagers are just normal teenagers. They're happy, kind of. And so when they see the camels and these young people dressed like, with like a Berber tunic, and stuff, they're like, wow, look at this. So they go over to them and petting the fennec fox, whose name is Alypius. Alypius was a friend of St. Augustine. And so they're fascinated with the masters of interior space, and they think they think, the Latin King kids think that the Masters of Interior Space are another competing gang. So they said, are you guys like a new gang here in Brooklyn? And, and they said, no, we're not a gang. We're the Masters of Interior Space. He goes, yeah, well, that's your name, right? You're not a gang? And they said, no. So they're talking and chatting with these teenage gang members. And in the course of the conversation, they say, yeah, we have to, our mission is in Manhattan, so we're going to cross the Brooklyn Bridge. So the teenager, the leader of the group of these three teenage Latin kings says, well, you're not going to cross the Brooklyn Bridge today because the pedestrian walkway is closed for repairs. So Stewart, the leader of the mission, said, oh boy. And he started to pray interiorly because that's their strong point, is interior prayer. So he started to pray. And after like a minute or so of quiet, the young Latin King fellow, who was kind of the leader of that little group of teenagers, says, hey, what are you doing? Why aren't you talking? Why are you so quiet? He said, well, I'm listening to the Spirit. And I asked him, I'm asking him, what should we do? Because the bridge is closed. And he says, you're listening to the Spirit. Well, what did he say? And he said, well, the Spirit told me that we should lead our caravan right across the East River, just walk across the river.
Oh, on the water?
Yes, on the water.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is great.
Does that Spirit hate you? He said, because if you was to take one step with that camel or anything onto the river, you're going right down. I mean, you're going to drown immediately. So he said, no, that's not going to happen. He said, no, the Spirit has told me that we will be gifted with the capacity to walk on water. Because remember what Jesus said. Mm-hmm. Jesus said, my followers will do even greater things than I have done. And so the Spirit is leading us. And so that's the only way we can do our mission. And so how do we get down closer to the water? So the guy goes, okay, follow me. So the teenager leads him down to like a floating dock. And the teenager says, look, as soon as you step off the dock and sink and float away, I'll call 911. And so Stewart says, put your phone away. He said, put your phone away. You're not going to need it. He says, I'm telling you, you're not going to need it. He says, but, after you see us walking on the water, he said, I would ask you to go back to your gang and tell your leader what you saw here today and gather up all the leaders of the other gangs in Brooklyn and meet me at the Empire State Building tomorrow at 12 noon, because I think they're going to want to meet the people who walked on the water with their camels and everything. So the guy goes, I'll tell you what, if you actually walk across this river, he said, I will leave the Latin Kings and become a master of interior space. So Stewart says, well, guess what? He says, you're already a master of interior space. It's just that you don't know it. You don't realize it. That's our whole mission, is to remind people who we are as human beings, as children of God, that our gift area is the interior life, but we're neglecting it. We've been neglecting it. We don't even know what's going on within ourselves. It's like, there's this expression, Cynthia, where, if let's say that in your parish, the pastor said, well, Cynthia, could you do such and such and really, really do as well as you possibly can? I mean, pull out all the stops, Well, that's a reference to the organ, if you want to play the organ like the best the best you could do some piece in Mozart, like you pull out all the stops, you play every conceivable note. So it means do impossible, Well, in our life, in our spiritual life, for some reason, we have never really, if you think about your experience in the Catholic Church for your whole life, most people have never really pulled out all the stops of spiritual growth. You know what I mean? They sort of stop along the way, They never really go deeply into the interior life. For some reason, they feel like it's not for them, and so that's the whole point of the mission, is to tell people, like, look, this is the time, this is a turning point in history, where we're on the cutting edge of really a whole new paradigm with the onset of like a globalized community, a globalized world community. And it's a very turbulent time in history because no one really knows how to do this, and everyone wants to end up on top. And, it's so that was the point of Queen Isabella to Stuart. She was explaining to him that during the age of discovery, the world kind of went crazy, the world of that time, right, of 1492 and thereafter, with the discovery of like what was the equivalent of like a new planet, or new planets for that matter. The whole known world of all of the European countries went wild. Like, oh my gosh, we got to get out there. We got to get a part of this. We got to get into the act. So you had Portugal, Spain, England, Ireland. I mean, just every country. Germany was running after the new world, trying to scoop up part of it and such. So the same thing Queen Isabella was, telling Stuart. The same thing is happening today, just in a different venue. That now it's all about outer space. It's all about, well, who's going to colonize the moon? Do we set up like an American flag there and a little station there where we put someone there and say like, okay, this is ours, and then what if some country gets to Mars first? Do they put their flag there? And on and on and on. So Queen Isabel saying like, look, we're at the turning point now. It's almost like a new age of discovery where the world is just about to go crazy again like it did before. And she said, Stuart, you have to do what I didn't do. Your mission is to do what I didn't do. Your mission is to tell the world that, look, it's not all about what's out there. There's really nothing different out there than we see around us right now. But what is different is what's within us. That's where you'll find the most unique beauty and the most unique wonder and the most unique fulfillment that you will ever find in your existence, So that's basically the book, Cynthia. That's really, I'm kind of surprised that I kind of summed it up. I was wondering if I could ever do that, but I think I just did.
Yeah, that's amazing. How long did it take you to write this again?
Now Cynthia, I'm glad you asked that question because here's the thing. I worked on this book. Now, remember, both you and I have agreed upon this one thing, at least, that neither of us have ever seen a novel that really communicates the interior life and contemplative prayer in a story fashion. Okay, so I didn't have a model for this book, so I actually prepared the book mentally for a year. I worked on it for a year. I'm not saying 24/7 for a year. When I had... I made like a mental outline, and then I made some notes about like how the book would move. What's the point of the book? What's the message? How can I best communicate this message? What story would work? What age group should the protagonist represent? Where should they be from? How is this going to work? What's the first chapter going to be like? How does the book end? How does it move? I got to keep moving. Where do they go? What do they do? Who's in it? So I worked on that whole framework mentally and with some notes, maybe just 2 pages of notes, like a schematic, as it were. And then I started writing. Well, I wrote a little bit for like, let's say, a month, and then I went on my 8-month mission appeal excursion. Well, you talk about writer's block. The mission appeal work that I do, I'm on the road living out of a suitcase for like 8 months. And so exhausting and so absorbing. You just have to really concentrate on what you're doing. It's so much travel, just moving from place to place, from retreat center to retreat center, from seminaries to religious houses. You're just constantly adjusting to new such. So it was so exhausting. I just could not write.
Yeah,
I just couldn't write. I'd like,
so you need time to sit and reflect, and you have to kind of relax too. You have to get away from the everyday grinds, at least for a little bit. So I can see what you're saying. It would be almost impossible to write especially something like you were writing. It's a busy schedule.
Yes, well, it's so true that you need a little bit of space where you can enter into reflection to get in touch with your your imagination and the spirituality you want to present and such. And so it's for like 8 months. So I wrote for like say a month, a little bit each day, just a few chapters maybe, and then I didn't write for 8 months. And then when the mission appeals were over, I rested up for a deep rest, you could say, for like 2 weeks where I slept. And then when I got forces back, oh my gosh, it just came pouring out of me. It was almost like 8 months where I wasn't writing. I think I was still actually ruminating over all of these things, interiorly. When after the mission appeals were over and I got down to my laptop and started hitting the keys, it was like I couldn't stop. Chapter after chapter after chapter just kept flowing. So it's 25 chapters. That sounds like a lot. It's only 146 pages. Each chapter is 5, 6, 7 pages, something like that.
Yeah.
And it moves very quickly. It's very dense. There's a lot of action and a lot of thought and a lot of reflection. And even if a person doesn't really, for some reason, doesn't really like the book, it will make them think. There's no question about it. You can't read this without it spurring on, your thought and reflection. And so, yeah. So I'm glad you asked me about how was it to write it. It was really not that easy. But I don't think you'll know that when you read it. It flows very, very nicely.
Yeah, that's really good. Just listening to the story as you tell it, it's like I really do think that's something that could become a Christian classic. That's got some pretty interesting thoughts in there. I mean, you're conveying things like, who would think of, all right, we're going to walk on the water in New York City,
Yeah.
It's really got a lot of these fascinating little turns that, go back to scripture almost in many cases. And it's like, that's just very interesting to me. It makes, I think for some people it would make, it would make scripture more present to them because they could look at something that you're talking about in New York City or something like that. And it's like, that really happened in biblical times, and it's like, I think that will make it a little more understandable to them.
Wow. I never even thought of that, Cynthia. That's a great observation. Thank you for sharing that because it really will work that way.
Yeah.
And, talking about miracles and such like that, the walking on the water, there is one scene where where the masters are parading through downtown Manhattan. So when they cross the East River by the whole caravan just walks on the river, and then they come up, and then they cross the entire river to Manhattan, and they come up on Pier 11. Pier 11 is the pier that serves Manhattan. My family's from Manhattan. I know quite a bit about Manhattan. So they come up on Pier 11, which is the pier where the ferries come in from Jersey, and some ferries from points in Brooklyn come to Pier 11 with people who work in the financial district, which is the whole area of Wall Street and such. So they come up on Pier 11, and they walk up Wall Street to Broad Street. It's about 6 blocks up. And they get to Broad Street and Wall Street. On the corner there is where the New York Stock Exchange is. It's right across from the Federal Building, which is where the giant statue of George Washington is, because he was sworn in as the first president of the United States right there in that Federal Building. And so the mission is one part of the mission is that they're going to enter into the building and the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange and to address the traders. And they're going in there with the camels and the burro and the fennec fox and everything. Mm-hmm. And so by the grace of God, it's all under the influence of the Spirit, the protection of the Spirit opens the doors and just makes everything work. So they go in there and they actually address the traders right there on their trading floor. And then they leave and they go to visit the One World Trade Center, and they pray there. And then they spend the night at the Conrad Hotel, which is right on the Hudson River. And then they go to, this is all through a very dynamic Catholic benefactor who lived and who was a multi-billionaire. And I mentioned him in one of my other books called To Whom the Heart Decided to Love. And so, and Benjamin Lake, who's a dynamic, Catholic, is helping them during this part of the Manhattan mission, the financial district mission. So they spend the night in the Conrad, and then the next day, they go to the Empire State Building. On the way there, they have an adventure in Chinatown. Then they have an adventure in Little Italy. And then they have an adventure where two police officers stop the caravan. They're just about to arrest them. And then, like, this incredible thing takes place. And then they go to the Empire State Building. Well, by the time they get to the Empire State Building, there's like 100 people walking along with them in like procession as they're like parading through the streets of Manhattan. And so they get to the Empire State Building. That's where the multiplication of the food that they had that was donated in Little Italy by an Italian deli owner. And so Tobias Trisong prays over the food, and it gets multiplied for the 100 people. And then they continue on to guess where they go for the final, how would you say, the final ultimate point in the mission, the most important point in the mission is they go to the United Nations, and they're going to, the Masters of Interior Space are going to address the General Assembly in session.
Wow.
And so, well, how could that possibly happen? Well, it happened. It happens because
God, with God, anything is possible.
Exactly. I mean, that's the whole sort of beauty. And I think that most people, when they pick the book up, they are not going to be able to put it down because it just moves from one thing to the next. And you just have to see what the next thing is, So, as they're addressing the General Assembly, just imagine three 21-year-old young people and the university professor, and they left the camels outside, but they took Alypius, the fennec fox, in with them because he was small enough it could carry him just like a little bit of a thing, So they took him in with them. And so by the grace of God, they're up there on the rostrum at the podium, and they're addressing the General Assembly, and they're giving them the message that God inspired them to say. Like it's like a teaching about the truth about man, that man is really an interior being, a being with uniquely blessed and a unique, how would you say it? Just a unique interior life that where he finds his strength and his meaning and his grace and his protection from God and his guidance, and everything is there. But so the masters are explaining this and saying, but the problem is we're not looking there right now as the world enters into this globalized sort of era where everything seems to be going wrong. They're saying you don't have to do it this way. You can look within and you can find a better way to make this transition, a much calmer, much more enlightened, a much more peaceful, a much more fulfilling way. But you can't do it unless you recognize who man really is, unless you recognize your giftedness, like that you do have an interior life, despite what the world is saying, that the world is saying that man is just this object, right? This one of many creatures that inhabit the universe, but he's no different. And so the message of the Masters of Interior Space is, but that's not true. He's very different. He's very special. And unless you recognize that, it's just not going to work, So anyway, as they're as steward is the speaker at the main point in the mission, which is the United Nations. Mm-hmm. And so I would say about maybe halfway, 3/4 of the way through the address, the masters levitate. They're lifted up in the air like 2 feet above the podium. All 4 of them, and this too, the fennec fox. They didn't initiate it. God did it. They just levitated. And so they're hovering there above the rostrum, above the podium, like 6 feet in the air. And Stewart just continues to address the representatives there. And the representatives are just like agog, like, oh my gosh, what are we witnessing here? What is going on? You know, this is unbelievable. I mean, we've been here for many different addresses, but this has never happened before, you know. So finally, they come back down to the rostrum, and he finishes up, and they escape. They get out before like security can get them, and they're back out on the street where they're safe. And so anyway, so that's the story.
Yeah, I really think that if you manage to get that out into the general Catholic and perhaps just general Christian population, that thing is gonna fly. And I think even secular people that have, you know, I mean, a lot of people have minimum or no religion, but they would read something like that. It's like C.S. Lewis on steroids.
There you go. Oh, that's great. Oh, I like that.
No, really. I'm fascinated by that.
Oh, that's
what a
thank
story.
You.
And I mean, the thing is, it's a story. The best stories are always based in truth. And the message that you're giving is the truth.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's like C.S. Lewis on steroids. A lot of steroids.
Oh, well, I like that. Oh, that's so cool, you know. So, Father Larry, how would you describe your story? Well, it's like C.S. Lewis on steroids.
I love it. It is, though. You could use that. You don't even have to credit me. I love that. That is a great book. I mean, really, I think that, you know, that's something that should be, somehow we should promote that book.
Yes, well,
that's I think it's an important book, and I think I mean, the storyline is incredible. You know, so.
The Lord is good to us, you know, and we do have, you know, high hopes for the book, and you know, this interview, Cynthia, is a great help because it will inspire people to check it out. You know, take a look at this unique presentation of something that's so integral to every human being's life, especially if you're a Christian, especially if you're a Catholic, and you're drawn to prayer life, and you want to grow in your interior life with God. You know, this is a way to find out a great deal. And you know, when the masters of interior space were in the desert with Jean-Pierre, the 80-year-old from Paris, he taught them this way of entering into the quiet in a sort of a structured, disciplined way to dispose yourself properly for the contemplative gift of prayer, or I should say the gift of contemplative prayer. And so they could learn that way as well, because the bishop describes it. So there's so much going on in the book. It's a book really for any age group. I would say begin, let's say, you know, college age and on up. It would be helpful for them. So thank you so much for your positive and affirming thoughts and statements with regard to the book. You know, we really, it gets out there, you know.
Yeah, I sure hope it does. I mean, you know, when I talk to people, if books come up, I'll tell them about it. You know, C.S. Lewis is still extremely popular. and also that type of book where you're going on literally a journey, but it's not just going from A to B, it's going from A to B inside. So it's like, you've really got a good combination there.
Yes, thank you. Interestingly, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry too. You should talk to Sebastian about how to really promote this, because he's really smart on things like that. Actually,
yes,
he's
well,
really smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually refer to him when I'm going to introduce him to someone. I say to them, now remember, it is he who knows all things. And it's true. But you know what? He's generous with everything he knows. And so if you ask him about promoting, I'll bet he can come up with some good ideas too.
Well, he already had a very good idea, Cynthia. We're thinking, there's two ideas that we're working on. First of all, the Masters of Interior Space book that I wrote that's out right now, the way it ends, okay, so after they address the UN, the spectacular experience of levitation, everyone witnesses it and everything, and so they go back to Notre Dame because Tobias Trisong and Charlotte Mahfoud, there are now students at Notre Dame. They had applied to Notre Dame. And so all three masters are now in master's programs at Notre Dame. And so Professor Lawton is already a professor there. So the three young masters are living in Professor Lawton's old farmhouse. It's a 3-story farmhouse on 100 acres of land just outside of the city limits of South Bend. And so you have the interior space living together. Their animals are roaming around on the 100 acres, just loving it. And so everyone's there. And so when they arrive back at Dr. Lawton's home, the farm, they're looking at his mail, right? The mail that had accrued while he was gone was placed by a neighbor in the living room next to the fireplace, and there's a 4-foot wooden crate there, and guess who's in the wooden crate when they open it up? That the statue of Queen Isabella. So, statue that was on the ship that appeared. That came to life with Stewart is now in Lawton's living room. Wow! So someone had mailed it. See, they were wondering what's. See, there was a name for that statue. The name for that statue was called in Spanish, La Imagen Viva, which means the living image. And so, but everyone thought it was a legend. Only certain people believed it, and Dr. Lawton was one who believed it. So now he's thinking that the statue, when they discovered it on the ship, the statue was being sent. Whoever had been protecting it secretly and harboring it, it was actually being sent to Dr. Lawton's residence because all of Spain knew that this American doctor from Notre Dame, this historian, believed in the legend and spent a big part of his life looking for it in Spain, trying to find it. So who was protecting it, apparently, was sending it to Dr. Lawton's house. So they get back to Indiana, to South Bend, to the farm, and there it is in his living room. So that's how the book ends, which means the book is
a sequel.
to another adventure of the Masters of Interior.
Yes, that's great. So you're not just going to have this one book; you'll have a whole series. That's a great way of ending it. Ending.
The Spirit moved me to end it in a way that it could be continued if the Spirit wanted to. So another thing we're thinking of is Dr. Sebastian was thinking of possibly starting discussion groups in parishes or in schools, Catholic schools, about the book, about the Masters of Interior Space, and starting clubs like Master of Interior Space clubs, and then that would.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and then the club would kind of like morph into like a kind of a prayer group, you know?
Yeah.
And so we're thinking along those lines.
This is big. I really believe this is going to be big.
Well, I hope so.
So do I.
Yeah.
I can go around and say I knew him when he was just a priest. Now he's the most well-known priest author in the world. No. But no, that the story itself, it stands on its own. It could easily become a classic over time. I mean, long after we're both gone. But that has got some real juice to it, I'll tell you.
Okay, well that's the best feedback. I have. Well, the book is just on the market, maybe a couple of days, so I haven't received that much feedback. This is the most articulated feedback I've had so far. And what I'm noticing, Cynthia, is that, I wrote the book, I wrote every word, every page, so I know it. I could practically recite it verbatim. I've gone over it so many, proofing it and fixing it up a little bit, and structured stuff. But here I am, I'm describing the book. It's sort of like in shorthand. I'm giving you like highlights, right? And you're getting real good sense for the book just with my description. Now imagine if you were to and get all the nuance and all the fine details and all the dialogue, the intricate dialogue. So you're having a really very positive response to me just describing it in a kind of a shorthand version. So I'm thinking that forebodes really well for anyone who actually reads the book,
Oh, yeah. And, I wouldn't discount the possibility of even getting converts because, there's a lot of young people, some old people too like me, that like reading that kind of book. And, it can open your eyes if God works on them and if they're open.
You're so right.
So, that, it's not just, no book is just something you read. They all have some impact on you. They're either negative or positive. And, usually when we think negative or positive, we're thinking of just as how we live in this world. But it's this country especially, I don't know about others, but we live in this world, which, obviously we can't live anywhere else right now, but we're living in this world. But most people don't have a true sense of the otherness of God, of the spirituality that they should be trying to engage in the wisdom they should be seeking. And it's you're introducing it in a way that is attractive to young people and to people who read this kind of literature, and they just might, you never know. I converted because I was in a bus in Italy that didn't have a bathroom or air conditioning. I'll tell you that story someday. but I ended up going into the catacombs and had a religious experience. So you never know what's going to do it.
Yeah, you never really. Yeah,
you never know.
Well, based on what you're just saying, Cynthia, about young people and such, and one of the things that I was trying to do with this particular book was that, quiet contemplative prayer has always been treated as sort of like this abstruse thing that, the average person really shouldn't go near it. You're not going to, be able to learn it. It's only for like monks, and they train for years to learn how to do it. It was always treated as this sort of almost like a secret, dark, dangerous thing that the average person should just stay away from that quiet stuff. And even in the various books that you would see that could teach you something about it, even just the cover of those books were kind of quoting. I'm thinking of like The Dark Night of the Soul. Or, you go into any books at the cover for The Dark Knight. It's like this scary looking thing, or The Ascent of Mount Carmel is like some guy who's like torn apart, climbing a mountain in a rainstorm. It's like, oh my gosh, what better way to turn off a reader who is wanting to in prayer than that? I mean, would anyone sell a product that way? By putting on the cover something that kind of turns off the person or scares them away. Yeah. So I said, you know what? I don't want to do that with this book. So we found a person who made an illustration that is very animated and very cheerful and very, very vibrant and colorful. I mean, the colors, they literally just jump out at you. And so the cover of the book, The Masters of Interior Space, is just so inviting and so joyful and cheerful. There's even like a colorful drawing of the fennec fox Alypius on the cover. There's the camel. There's the steward is on the cover. There's the desert, and then there's like these little tents that were in the oasis, and then in the background you see the skyline of downtown Manhattan. The Empire State Building, skyscrapers. That's like telling the reader, like, it starts in the desert, but that's where they're going. That's where they're going to end up. Yeah. And so the cover is so completely different than what you would see in a normal like treatise on the spiritual life, and that's a conscious. I did that consciously. I could have chose a cover that was more like mysterious and contemplative. Let's really gray and dark.
Well, that wouldn't work with that book. So who is the painter? Who is the artist?
Well, the artist, I'm glad you're asking, Cynthia. The artist, believe it or not, is someone who just published a book with En route Books and Media. That's my publisher, your publisher.
Yeah.
Her name is Danielle Mesa. She's from Boston. She's a professional art. She's a professional art illustrator, and she's a writer, very good writer, I might add. And so she just called Cardellina. And so I asked her, I saw her illustrations for Cardellina, and I asked her, would you be willing to do the illustration for my new book? And she said, yeah, sure, absolutely. And so she sent me the illustration, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good, so perfect. I mean, I love it. So Danielle, her father, Cynthia, interestingly enough, how did I meet Danielle? Well, I was doing a mission appeal in Boston at the cathedral where Cardinal Sean O'Malley lives. Well, guess who serves as the deacon in the cathedral with Cardinal Sean? Danielle's father.
Oh, wow.
Her father is Deacon Ricardo Mesa. He's the deacon there at the cathedral. So he knows Cardinal Sean real well. And so Deacon Ricardo invited me out to dinner when I was there. So I went to dinner at this beautiful restaurant with Deacon Ricardo and his whole family. And that's where I met Danielle, and I went back to their home with them for dessert, and I was looking at her art and stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And so, yeah, the one, when anyone sees the cover of this book, they're going to immediately be struck by its vibrant and cheerful beauty.
Great. That's great. You're making good marketing decisions, and the marketing is important not because of money, but because the more people that buy it, the more people will read it.
There you go.
So if it's attractive to them, they'll go for it.
Yes.
So I think that's great.
Well, anyway, why don't we wrap this up and I can start with a prayer, but I can end with a prayer.
Sure, you can. Yeah.
But before I do, I just want to thank you once again, Cynthia, for giving me this opportunity.
Well, I'm always here if you want another interview on any book you write. So, as long as I'm alive and well, I'll be doing this. I hope this is my ministry. So
Wow. Well,
yeah.
So that's very kind of you. Well, anyway, blessing of Almighty God, Father, Son, and Spirit, descend upon you, descend upon all your listeners with new grace, with new inspiration, new peace, with all the gifts and blessings of Jesus risen from the dead. May our Heavenly Father make you one with him as he is one with you. And I ask this blessing in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent interview. I really enjoyed myself just listening to the storyline and everything. It was wonderful.
That's
yeah. So I
Thank
think
you.
I think you'll do well. You're welcome. Okay, well, you take care, Father.
Okay, you have a blessed night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.